Welcome to the conversation and the second installment of our series, The Stakes in the States. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Michigan, including a look at what's happening in the legislature this session, thanks to our special guest for the evening, Michigan Senator Stephanie Chang. So my name is Sarah McCarthy, and like I said, I work for the States Project. And if you're new to what we do, we work to build governing power for state lawmakers who are committed to improving lives. And I know that's a bit of a mouthful, so I want to take a minute to break that down. We're focused on building majorities in state legislatures, and we use data to guide every decision that we make. We analyze all 99 state legislative chambers in the country and find which are possible to flip to win a majority that will work to improve lives. That means identifying which districts will be key and which candidates will be the majority makers. And we do this because we know state lawmakers decide every issue we care about. And when I say every issue, I truly mean every issue. Can all children access a quality education? Is the water flowing from your tap clean? Can you access an abortion in your state? And how far do you have to drive to cast a ballot? These are all questions that your state lawmaker decides, not politicians in DC. And that brings me to Michigan, which is one of the states where we're actively fighting to shift the balance of power this November. And when we talk about the stakes in the states, there is a lot at stake in Michigan. So let's go ahead and dive in with Senator Chang. Senator, I want to thank you for joining us. And could you start by just introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your personal story?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first Twitter Spaces event, so hoping everything's working out okay, but super excited to be on. Again, my name is Stephanie Chang. I am a daughter of immigrants who came to this country looking for a better opportunity, and honestly, the values that they came here believing in are really the values that I try to fight for every day in the Michigan legislature. I am a mommy legislator. I have two young daughters. I have a 6-year-old, 2.5-year-old. Before I ran for office, I was a community organizer, and honestly still a community organizer, but really working for about a decade in Detroit on a number of social justice and civil rights issues like affirmative action, criminal justice reform, immigrants' rights, and voting rights. Ran for office in 2014 to make a difference in a bigger way. So I've been in the Michigan legislature for a little over 7 years now. I live in Detroit, near downtown Detroit, which is truly an honor. I love my district so much, representing Detroit and downriver. I've served in the minority all of my years in the legislature, really excited about hopefully making that change for next year. And I also have the honor of serving as our Democratic floor leader in the Michigan State Senate. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I have to say, 2 kids of that age plus legislating, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. But I'd like to start with a topic that I think is on everyone's minds right now, which is democracy. The right-wing majority in Michigan has introduced dozens of anti-voter policies, both last year and this year. And while Governor Whitmer has vetoed those that have made it to her desk, there's now a push to circumvent her veto power through ballot initiatives. Can you explain who's behind that push and what their goals are?
Thank you so much for this question, because I think that it's so clear that voting rights literally affects every single other issue that we work on and that we care about in our community. So this is a huge priority. So Michigan Senate Republicans had introduced a 39 bill package last year. Basically, my summation of those bills is that they would make it harder to vote and are based on a lie. Thankfully, the bills that we have voted no on as Democrats that have gone to the governor's desk have been vetoed. And I'll tell you a little bit about what some of these bills are. And obviously, they're 39, so I won't go into every single detail. But they're everything from removing the affidavit option. So if you go to the polls and you don't have a photo ID, currently in Michigan law, there's an affidavit option to say, this is who I am. Yes, I am who I am. I just don't have my ID. There are provisions around provisional ballots and having to actually go to your clerk's office and prove your identity within 6 days of an election. There's strict voter ID requirement in these bills, banning clerks from providing prepaid return postage for ballots. barring clerks from counting absentee ballots in the weeks leading up to an election, as well as really restrictive requirements around drop boxes, making it so that our split bipartisan county boards of canvassers would have to approve those drop boxes, prohibiting the use of drop boxes after 5 o'clock the day before election day. Just a whole lot of changes that we know would make it harder to vote and are based on this lie that somehow the election was stolen, which obviously it was not stolen. We've seen that over and over again. So as far as what the Michigan very unique and unfortunate loophole is that with citizen initiatives, people can actually collect signatures for a ballot initiative and then not actually send it to the ballot. It can go to the legislature and then basically circumvent a governor's veto. So they, right now, there is an initiative called Secure My Vote. And in this proposal, there's a whole lot of really backward policies that make it harder to vote, that are very much anti-democracy. Makes it harder to vote absentee, prohibits election officials from making AV ballot applications available except when the voter requests it, making it harder for us to have polling locations that are in our communities. And so there's a big effort right now that's called Decline to Sign. We want to make sure that people know what they're signing. And unfortunately, in Michigan law, people don't have to tell the truth when they ask you to sign the petition. So the good news is that there is also a good ballot initiative that people are collecting signatures for, hopefully soon, called Promote the Vote 2022. That would do some positive things for our drop boxes, allow for postage for AV ballots and ballot tracking, allowing for 9 days of early in-person voting, allowing voters to request absentee ballots for all future elections. So we've got some bad news, but we've got some really good news. So, the bottom line is for Michigan voters, we've got to really make sure that they know what they are signing when they're asked to sign one of these petitions. But I just want to end on this note is that, there are so many efforts here to make it harder to vote. We have seen time and time again, people just not being able to get it into their heads that the 2020 election was secure, the results are valid. Audit after audit has shown that the election was secure. And so we need to move on and then also protect voting rights as much as we can.
And when we talk about the initiatives that make it harder to vote, I think what's really fascinating to me about this tactic is that ballot initiatives are meant to be a tool that really empowers voters, not one that silences them. But there's a loophole in how Michigan law is written that really flips this on its head. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Yeah, so basically, they're mad that Governor Whitmer vetoed their bills, and they're trying to go around her. And so what they're trying to do is collect signatures from a small percentage of Michigan voters to qualify for the ballot, but then actually go straight to the legislature and get a vote from the legislature, which is a currently Republican legislature, both the House and Senate. With this loophole, it actually would not go to the governor's desk. So all they need is the majority of, basically the Republican vote in the House and Senate in Michigan, and that would actually not send it to the ballot, which is completely backwards because the whole idea of a citizen initiative is to give citizens, our voters, the ability to vote on an issue. So this is obviously something that we need to change. We've had legislation introduced to fix this loophole, but unfortunately it hasn't moved forward.
Speaking of democracy, that brings me to the issue of presidential electors. So certain Michigan political figures have been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee for their role in attempting to submit false presidential electors in 2020. And I'm just curious if you're at all concerned if the current majority continues to hold power. Is that something we might see happen again in 2024?
It's definitely something to be concerned about. I mean, my hope is that we will see a much different legislature and that we'll see a shift in this narrative. But unfortunately, in Michigan, we saw 16 Republicans, including Michigan Republican Party co-chair Michon Maddock, falsely identify themselves as "quote unquote" duly elected and qualified electors, which they were not. They sent in unofficial certificates sent to federal officials. And we believe very much that this could be fraud or forgery, which is illegal. So there is an investigation that is going on. But ultimately, we need to change who controls the legislature and take back this narrative about elections. We have secure elections. Our laws are working in Michigan. We've had numerous audits here in the state. And so we need to really tell the truth, because that's what our residents deserve.
Absolutely. And obviously, democracy is a huge issue for legislatures right now. But another topic that will put states in the spotlight this year is abortion access. The Supreme Court is considering a case out of Mississippi that could potentially end Roe v. Wade as we know it, leaving the question of abortion access up to state lawmakers. So, if Roe falls, what would the impact of that look like in Michigan?
Honestly, we are very concerned in Michigan. We have an antiquated law from 1931 that criminalizes abortion that never was overturned, never was repealed. So if Roe v. Wade is overturned this year, we will actually go back to this law, which isn't being enforced currently, but it is still on the books. So if Roe v. Wade is overturned, I just want to reiterate, we will have one of the most restrictive laws in the entire country. And we know that our current Republican leadership does not see a problem with this law, despite the fact that it is incredibly restrictive, and despite the fact that Michiganders overwhelmingly support upholding Roe v. Wade. So when we know that there are so many reasons a person might choose to have an abortion, but ultimately it really is them and their doctor who should decide what to do, not the government. Banning safe, effective abortions is discriminatory, it's government overreach, and it really could enhance the gap between the privileged and less privileged in our communities. We know so well from data over and over again that there are huge gaps in healthcare and societal outcomes for people of color, low-income people, and those who live in very rural areas who might have to drive hours to get abortion care if we go back to this really old 1931 criminalization law. Every single session in Michigan that I've been in has featured at least one bill seeking to limit or ban abortion, how it can be carried out, where it can be carried out, by whom. And really, we've seen time and time again just all of this fear mongering, imagery that is really trying to stoke distrust of institutions and people who are healthcare providers that deserve to be treated with respect. So we are going to continue to fight back. We have introduced bills several times now to repeal this antiquated 1931 law here in Michigan. But of course, due to the Republican majority, those bills have not moved forward. And so that just really speaks to how important this November election is, so that we can change who's in power in the Michigan legislature and finally repeal this law.
I want to acknowledge this conversation has felt a bit doom and gloom up until this point. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is how close we are to having that new majority in the Michigan legislature. Flipping 3 seats in each chamber would stop the right wing's unchecked control, and 3 seats is incredibly close. That said, can you tell us what you're working on right now that you're most excited about, and how policy priorities might shift if a new majority is elected this November?
Thank you. So I'll talk about two major things. Obviously, there's so much that we could talk about, but two big things is water and then gun violence prevention. So I'll start with water. Michigan, we are the Great Lakes state. We are literally surrounded by fresh water. And we've been talking for years now about water infrastructure needs, protecting our waterways, protecting our groundwater, ensuring that every single person has access to safe and affordable drinking water, because we've seen, the ramifications of the Flint water crisis, as well as more recently, PFAS contamination throughout our whole state. Benton Harbor, Hamtramck let in their water. And in Detroit, we saw thousands of people get their water shut off. This is a giant human rights issue, but it's also a public health issue. And so when I think about water, I think about Nicole Hill, who was a woman in Detroit who, she had her water shut off because she simply couldn't afford her gigantic water bill. And she has been an amazing, amazing advocate for her and her family, because she will talk about her story of having her water shut off, and actually having to go to the emergency room because of an infection that was due to that shut off. So we need that affordability programs that we've been fighting for. We need shut off protections. And this is an important issue that unfortunately we know that it's just going to continue to be an uphill battle unless we change the makeup of the legislature. And then also on water, we saw huge flooding last year, basements flooded with sewage. We saw heaters and furnaces and refrigerators and years of people's cherished memories out on their curbs due to the flooding that we know is caused by climate change. We saw freeways flooded. And so as Democrats in the House and Senate, we've introduced a forward-thinking climate resilience package that would help to create jobs and create more resilient neighborhoods and infrastructure, but they're not going anywhere. We need a Democratic majority to move these bills forward. So I'll turn to gun violence prevention. We saw in November 2021 the shooting at Oxford High School where 4 students were tragically killed and numerous others that were injured. And this was a preventable incident, preventable deaths. If we had safe storage laws, if we had red flag laws, if we had universal background checks, we could have prevented this type of terrible tragedy that we saw in Oxford High School here in Michigan. I want to give a shout out to Senator Rosemary Bayer, who represents Oxford and that community and actually used to live there. She's done a tremendous job leading our gun violence prevention caucus and leading on issues of the red flag laws as well as safe storage. But again, I've been in the Michigan legislature for 7 years now, have introduced numerous bills as part of these packages over the past 7 years, and they never go anywhere, despite the fact that the majority of Americans and the majority of Michiganders support these common sense gun violence prevention bills. And if we have a Democratic majority, we can finally make these bills a reality.
So important. My final question tonight is a bit more abstract than what we've covered, but something that I do think about a lot. When we talk about what's at stake in the states, I think it really highlights how heavy the world feels right now. From the insurrection to the pandemic, and now the terrifying headlines that are coming out of Ukraine, I think a lot of folks feel really worn down. But at the end of the day, the only way that we can shift power in Michigan and in other states is if more people engage in this work. So I'm curious, what would you say to someone who feels so overwhelmed by politics that they're just tempted to tune out?
That's a great question. And I know that it's an overwhelming time. Politics is overwhelming. Watching what's happening in Ukraine is horrific and overwhelming and, sometimes feel a sense of helplessness. And then we also know that there's just so many of us who have been so exhausted by this pandemic. Well, I'll tell you what motivates me. Again, like I mentioned, I have 2 young daughters. They are my little motivators. They keep me going because it is their generation's future that we're fighting for. We know what they deserve. We know that the future, the current reality that is around us right now is not what they deserve. They deserve so much better. So, especially for those of you out there who are parents who have parented during this pandemic, we know that so many of you are exhausted. But we also know that our kids deserve a much better future with adequately paid educators, with the resources that they need, childcare that's affordable and accessible, earned paid sick time, flexible work and home balance policies. And I think about my 2 daughters, what virtual kindergarten was like last year, and all of the challenges that they faced, and the fact that our world looks so much different now during this pandemic. And we know that my kids and everyone else's kids deserve the best chance possible. So, I know that it can be overwhelming. It can feel sometimes like there's a million issues out there, and that sometimes politics is becoming more and more discouraging. But I have so much hope for our future because not only my 2 daughters that are my motivators, but I also really do believe that we've seen such a surge in activism. We've seen so many people getting more engaged in saying, this is what we need. This is what my community deserves, or fighting back, whether it's reproductive health care, access to abortions, or water access, or paid sick leave. We've seen people just really step up to the plate and say, this is what we need, and get active. And so please stay engaged. We need you in this fight with us. We need as much help as we can this November to change who's in power in the Michigan legislature and finally deliver on the policies that Michiganders need and deserve.
Thank you, Senator. It's such an important message. We truly appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. And on that note, I'd like to make sure everyone who hears this conversation understands exactly how they can get involved in this work. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to an expert in creating meaningful political change, my coworker, Melissa Walker.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much. This was really, really wonderful to listen to you both tonight. And Senator Chang, thank you so much for being here with us. After hearing this conversation, those of you who are listening might be thinking about state legislatures in a new light, because these are true power centers where the radical right has been organizing for decades. And they are a place where, if we focus, we can have a real impact. And I'm talking about we as in the people who are listening to this right now. Because here's the thing. It is often cheaper to change the balance of power in a state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. Congressional races cost millions and millions of dollars. State legislative races do not. And when we read about these big death of democracy articles and know how high the stakes are, it can feel helpless and hopeless. But just like Senator Chang said, in Michigan, it's 3 seats in each chamber to tie and 4 seats to shift the balance of power completely. Those are state legislative seats, not federal seats. These are local races. So light a path to action here for yourself, for your friends, for your family. Plug in. I run the Giving Circles program at the States Project, and it is a way for people to involve their family, friends, and communities in making real change. So I just want to let everyone know we do not have to be witnesses to the death of democracy. You, with your community and information and support and tools from our team, can fight for this country at a foundational level and have real impact to shift, make new majorities that will focus on improving people's lives and protect our democracy. So if you're interested in learning more, go to statesproject.org/action. And I just want to thank everyone for listening and for being here today.